Hey, welcome back to Music Theory Logic. My name's Andrew, and today's another music theory breakdown. I'm really excited about the one we have today. Today it is Lost by NF featuring Hopsin. Let's go ahead into the logic session. Cool, so here we are in my rendition of Lost by NF featuring Hopsin. I absolutely love this record. It's relatively new. The lyrics are incredible. I encourage everyone, if you haven't heard this track, pause this right now and go listen to Lost featuring Hopsin by NF. I'm not going to play the original track since I don't have the copyright. I'm going to play my recreation of the track. I do my best to get every note perfect. That's my first priority. And then I try to choose instruments that are as close as possible to the original, but this isn't 100%, but I'm really proud of how it sounds. Here it goes. Here's my rendition of Lost. Here would be the hook. Verse 2/breakdown, my favorite part. Believe this is Hopsin's part. Here comes our hook. Cool. Hopefully you enjoyed that. Again, it's not perfect mix-wise to the original. It sounds like live tracked strings to me. Obviously, all of this is MIDI. Helps because we can actually look at all the notes. But sonically, MIDI orchestral stuff is never going to be quite perfect, at least right now. You can get it like super close if we spent time with automation and paying attention to sort of MIDI articulation, but it's still not going to sound like a real player. Let's go ahead into the scale and talk about the chords and music theory in this. Cool thing about the song, although it is quite complex in terms of the arrangement and the instrumentation, somewhat simple musically speaking. So it's in the key of A natural minor. That's the white keys on the piano from A to A. There are no black keys in the scale. Cool. If you guys have looked at my music theory textbook, if you haven't, I'll link to it below. But in the text, I basically talk about how A minor is the most basic minor scale and how you can use this as a reference for really all minor scales that you work with, especially in a computer, because you can just drag this up or down. Cool. So the main section or the verses of the song basically hold the A minor harmony with the violin lead and the brass sound. We'll go into that in a second. The hook, the chord progression is basically in A minor. That's a 1 chord with A, C, and E, 1, 3, and 5 from the scale. Then we're going to a 2 chord. That's a B diminished. That's here. I will say this chord is somewhat unusual in popular music. It will bring out kind of like a classical sort of sound, which that coupled with the instruments we hear, which are from the classical world, violins, cellos, double basses, horns, will also sound quite classical. So it's going A minor, B diminished. Then this is actually a 6 chord, major 6, and F major in second inversion. That means technically that chord in root position would look like that, but the arrangement or chord voicing has that in second inversion. That kind of highlights this rising bass line that you hear. Cool. And then finally we get a D minor chord. That's a minor 4 in the key of A minor. All of these notes are what we would call diatonic chords, or in other words, every single one of these pitches comes from our scale notes on the left. So there's not a single note that's out of key. Cool. Let's go section by section. So it starts out with that big brass. I'll play the first section, then we'll break it down. Cool. So we have a kick drum happening every other measure. That's with a low pass filter on it. The main sounds you're hearing are those pizzicato strings. Pizzicato is a classical articulation term for like plucked strings. We are playing, even though these look held out, they're not really held, aside from the delay and reverb I have on that. The notes are going A up to F, the 6th note, back to A. So 1 minor 6 back to the 1, and then up an octave to the next A. And that pattern, that 2 measure pattern repeats for the entire verse. Let's watch it. Cool. We have a really subtle pad, also low pass filter on it. It's basically playing a root position A minor chord. That was just something that after I built this first part of the beat, I didn't feel like we quite had the atmosphere of the original track, so that's what that layer is doing. And then finally we have these brass stabs. It's an A octave, so super low brass, like a tuba sound, with up an octave. So a brass section, multiple players in that VST. For most of my sounds today, I'm using East-West instruments, so straying a little bit from default instruments just because I wanted this to feel as epic as the original did. Encourage you guys to check out Composer Cloud by East-West. It's $30 a month, and you get access to plugins that without that program would cost thousands and thousands of dollars and be cost prohibitive for most of us. Cool. The next section of the song basically is the same part with a sub and drums added in. Let's look at our drums. So I'm using samples for our kick and our snare. Let's solo out 4 measures of this as it, for the most part, repeats. Cool. So the kick pattern almost has the same repeat, but it varies every other group of 2 measures. So we start out with a kick on the 1 and a kick after that dotted quarter note, which is on the 6th, 16th note, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the 7th, 16th note, excuse me, if you're counting boxes in your 16th note grid. Then the second measure, we get a kick on the 2nd, 8th note. And this is kind of thematic to the groove. But we get a kick on the 2nd, 16th note. That is somewhat unusual, and we're going to find that the sub does that as well, which is why I call it thematic. It's sort of built into the sound of this track. Halftime snare. Snare's on beat 3. We're at 117 beats per minute, so somewhat slow, but that kind of allows these incredible lyricists to really do all sorts of different rhythms against it. Once again, go listen to that original. It's one of the better sort of lyrically driven hip hop songs I've heard in a long time. Cool. Let's go into continuing on the drums really quickly. We have this channel, which is basically doing our cymbals and our secondary snare. So we have some trill cymbals going on. Those are basically 30-second notes. That's the really fast sound. We get some open hi-hats at the end of the first measure. Then we basically get some steady eighth note cymbals. We get this snare roll pattern. Now, this is partly the rhythm I was talking about that is thematic. Our snare roll happens on the second measure on the 4th 16th note right here, but then it happens in the next quarter note on the 2nd 16th note. That's the same rhythm we saw in the kick drum that I said was unique. We're going to see it in the sub. Thus, it's definitely a thematic sound. And then finally, second group of 2 measures, we get some other closed cymbals, each on a just closed hi-hat. The, I guess, third measure of this drum groove has a cymbal on the second quarter note, 2 eighth notes on 3 and, so that's with the snare, 3 30-second note in a row, followed by a second eighth note cymbal. We get the same snare roll pattern that happens. That's one of the things that happens every second measure that repeats as the drums go. And again, it has exactly the same pattern with that second 16th note. So that is thematic. Let's go ahead and look at the sub. So like a lot of this music in this style, our sub, as I teach my students, is on like team kick. A lot of this music has like a pitched kick drum or an 808 sound. I'm not using that today. I'm using an actual sub. I'm using Razor by Native Instruments on this channel. And essentially, it's playing the one note, the A, that's doubled up with the kick drum, same rhythms, holding out. This second one, this doubles up with our snare roll, or at least the first and third note here do. These two. And then, again, this second 16th note being really thematic to the song, that is the A. We're doing this fill. This one note makes it kind of like harmonic minor for a second. So harmonic minor has a raised 7th. That's also called the leading tone. In A, that's a G sharp. That's that note right here. So we're going 1, and then up to 2, the B, down to the raised 7, G sharp, back to the 1. This pattern repeats every 2 measures, unlike the kick drum pattern, which kind of changes. All right, where we got the additional kicks, the second measure. Now, again, that one is thematic. That is where we have the snare, the kick, and the sub all hitting, and it's an unusual rhythm. So really a cool element. Awesome. Let's keep going. Halfway through NF's first verse, we get this really cool guitar type sound. It sounds like very palm muted guitar to me. It's doing what together with the violin starts to sound like an A minor arpeggio. So it's playing the 5th note from A minor, E, then it's going up to C, back to B, back to C on an 8th note rhythm. That is like 3, 2, 3 from the scale, back to 5, an octave up from that. Let's hear that and watch it. And that basically repeats. Now, you probably noticed some delay. I would say one thing that's really common sound design-wise on this track is that it's very atmospheric. A lot of the atmosphere is created by my reverb buses here. I'm using RC48 by Native Instruments, and then I'm also using, let's look at this, my Lexicon reverb by Universal Audio. This is super cool. This Kevin Kline atmosphere. I've heard a lot of producers on Pensado's Place talking about it. It almost is like a super sustained, compressed, long, loud reverb that almost mimics a delay since it's so audible. Cool. Then this is going to be the hook section. I already told you the chords. It's going the 1 chord, diminished 2 chord, up to the 6th chord in second inversion, followed by a 4 chord. That's happening on I have 2 organs playing it. The pad is playing it. Our pizzicato string layer is basically doubling that low note. Our guitar lead continues. Our drum pattern continues. The kick and the snare is the same. The sub line is slightly different. It's following that bass line for the most part, except it's going A up to D. This is the second note in that B diminished, so it's still in the chord. This is the root note from the chord. That makes sense. It makes it feel less like an inverted chord. And then finally, this E note is actually a ninth compared to like the D chord that's happening, and to my ear that just kind of like almost feels out of key. It adds to the dissonance there. Let's listen. So right there, you probably are like, whoa, that's a lot of notes. It's basically the triads times 2, so they're happening twice in 2 parallel octaves. The notes in a chord are going to be the sound. So in the A minor, it has 3 notes, A, C, and E. You can actually voice those chords tons of different ways. You can put the A and C really far from each other. It's the sound of all 3 of those notes ringing together, not really where they are. So once you understand some music theory, it's not as simple as just, like plugging in these 3 notes. You can really be as creative as you are compelled to be with the chord voicings and kind of like the color or the texture of the sound, which is really, really well done in the song, which is why I'm doing this video. I think if the music world responded to like the best written music, this would be like truly a top charting record. It's doing really well, but it's not as big as perhaps some of the major label supported pop stuff is. So the next section, this is like the coolest part to me. Effects wise, I'm using an impact sound here by Cymatics. I reversed that impact to create the uplifting sort of sound. Let's hear this section and then I'll break it down. I love that section. So, all right. From top to bottom, our brass sound is doing the same low note as our chords. So it's going A, B, C, D, just climbing up the musical alphabet. I have the pads playing the same chords that they were playing before. That's in line with the brass I just showed you. Then we have our choir on this second. It's every other measure on the halftime backbeat on beat 3. This is with the snare. It's going between octaves of E. That's the choir sound. Cool. Then the main thing that happens is our violins that were piccato, really plucked sounding, go to a more bowed technique or a legato technique, connected in music as an articulation, as we would say. So one, I have the MIDI that's going longer. 2, those notes are going to run in together. It's the same, let's see, this is the same notes that were happening from our guitar line before. So it's not the same as the pizzicato line, but it's going E up to C, B, C. So that's the same notes that we saw in the guitar line. But again, a legato strings. Then we hear double basses for the first time. So this is the lowest kind of our bass at that time. Let's hear that. Cool. So it's doing that low note, A, B, C, D, E, or sorry, A, B, C, D, the first 4 of the alphabet and of our scale. Then we're doing an E up to A to E. This is kind of an echo of where the first legato violins play those C, B, C, slightly different notes. E up to A, back to E. All of these notes that you see are actually from our 1 chord. More important notes from our 1 chord, the 1st and the 5th. Cool. So together, that texture creates something really cool. You're gonna notice like these are the double basses, these are the violins. There's echoing. Let's hear that. Nice. So on a side note, if I wanted to make this sound even more humanized, I would have the MIDI, lots of imperfection here, and since they're the same color, that's telling us it's the same velocity, so not as realistic, but you could probably guess this took me a while to to recreate this track. Did it by ear as well. So after the first 8 bars, or 16, yeah, the first 16, no, sorry, my brain stopped working for a second. After the first 4 bars of this little breakdown, we get an additional violin. I'm calling this additional harmony that comes in. It's playing a melody in the background that's somewhat lower in the mix, fills it out, makes this feel even more like classical or orchestral. It's doing kind of a scale run, C, B, C. That's the same from the other stuff. Then it completes the run, B, A, skipping down to E. Then we get an A, C, B. Those notes were also in our other riffs. And then finally, up an octave, A. Let's listen to all of that. This is the additional violin. Here comes that additional violin. And the high octave. Cool. So that is basically everything that's happening. Let's play that whole section one more time. I really, really love this part. Hopefully you guys watching do as well. Go, I've said it like 4 times already, but go listen to the original, put some headphones on, and it's epic. And watch the video. Really, really well done. Somewhere snowy. Cool. So that next section is basically the same thing as the first verse. The cymbal pattern is slightly more developed. In addition to that, what's happening is we have the choir playing the same thing. It happens in the breakdowns, but on top of it, the strings go back to the same pattern we had before. Cool. And that basically represents everything that you hear in the rest of the song. So arrangement-wise, it's really cool. It's almost like we get a 16-bar NF verse after an 8-bar intro. We get the hook. Then we get another 16-bar verse from NF, and then we go like straight into Hopsin. And if you watch the video, it's really, really cool how that's done. So if those artists happen to watch this, much respect. Really, really well done song. So hopefully you found this helpful. It certainly adds to a lot of like epic nature when you have these orchestral instruments and this big orchestral sound. If you found this helpful, you'd help me out a lot by subscribing to the channel, hitting the bell for notifications so you'll find out when I make my next video. Once again, we got to learn a lot of music theory in the key of A minor from the track Lost by NF and Hopsin. Go check out that track if you want to hear my music or get that music theory text. I'll link to that below. And most importantly, have a beautiful day. I'll see you guys next time. Cheers.